certainly appreciate everybody sticking around for part two of this interview with Brad from Full Spectrum Survival. Gray is the new gold, and we're going to pick up exactly where we left off. Thank you all very much. Every word that you speak.
That's right. And we look at it as a society and we say, wow, this is great. The sheep will say, wow, this is great. So if I go out of the state and I try to use my debit card, my bank puts a hold on it because I might have stolen that card or someone might have stolen my card. So this infringement of my privacy is absolutely amazing. And they eat it and they love it in every step of the way because it's all
protected, Brad.
That's right. It's all under the guise of security. It's all under the guise of safety.
It's
and
to help me.
Safe. That's right. So, they'll spew the same BS when the boots are in the street because it will be under the guise of security, and the population as a whole will eat it up and they'll love it. And you look at, you get the same argument from people who say it'll never happen here. We have too many armed citizens. We have too much of an armed militia here in the US. But they buy this infringement of privacy. They buy this militarization of law enforcement, and they buy the rules that are being put into place, like the inability to protest. And they're eating this up today. It's those same people that will stand by and do nothing in the event of real tyranny, physical, kinetic tyranny here in the US.
And I want to ask you about that. I was speaking with Michael Noonan just a couple of days ago. During that conversation, he pointed out Occupy Wall Street rose like a rocket. I mean, right. It was just this massive movement that went global in a very, very short window of time. And it crashed even quicker. Mm-hmm. It was not crashed of its own accord. It was squelched by governments around the world, including the U.S. government. It was squelched by the bought and paid for brown shirts. They are currently blue, but believe me, they're brown. Right. And do you think that it would be possible for our nation to rise up and say no more?
They're trying to make it impossible. And I've talked about the current administration, and everybody has a different viewpoint on whether, for me, my viewpoint on the president of the United States has never changed. This one person is allowed to be in power, and that power is mostly just what's visible to the sheep of the world. But what's happening right now is this current administration is doing the wrong things for the right reason. Right now, your ability to protest the government is being outlawed. And they're using this under the guise of civil discourse, societal unrest. They're using recent incidents like the North Dakota oil pipeline protests, anti-Trump protests. They're using all of these things and saying, look at all this violence that can happen. We need to make protesting illegal, which is great. You and I say, okay, well, we don't want undue unrest, or undue social misjustice, which is true. But what it does is it sets the precedence and sets the grounds for all protests to be illegal. And that means that when the government does something wrong, you and I cannot stand up and say this is wrong, because they are in sole control of whether or not you're allowed to protest. So right now, the most recent laws that went into place regarding that were, one, you can't wear a mask, so you can't protect your identity while protesting, which in itself is very dangerous, because if the government's doing something wrong, a lot of people won't stand up because they don't want to be singled out. And we all know that agent provocateurs go to the protests and videotape each and every person so that they can put them into the facial recognition system, right, find out who they are, and bring them to jail. So now you can't wear a mask. Well, now they made it legal for police and law enforcement and the military and Joe Schmo to run over protesters who stand in their way. Which you say, okay, well, if someone boxes grandma in, I want her to be able to get out of there. Yes, that's true, but that's not what it said. The law said that anyone, all people, will not be held accountable in any form for running over protesters. That means that when the military, when the law enforcement wants to barrel through the street that is being crowded by people who say the government is doing something wrong, that they have the legal wherewithal to put the pedal down to the metal and barrel through all of those people, and it's perfectly legal. And
Can
the
you
third
say
step,
Bazina?
that's right. And the third step is they're making protesting, a gathering of people, of 4 or more people, without the permit who's given to you by the government, illegal. So when something does go wrong, we won't have the ability to stand up for it without a true risk of large, widespread misjustice. And look at Turkey as a perfect example. Right now, protesting is illegal. Anybody who shows any sort of discontent and malcontent towards the government gets rounded up. They're now rounding up all of the academics, over 3,000 academics, over 3,000 professional uh, educational teachers. So your professors, your school teachers, anyone who has any sort of ability to shape the minds of the citizens and are anti-government or not pro-government are being rounded up. 3,000 in just the last couple of weeks. So if you take that picture of Turkey, which is a Western-backed, US-backed dictatorship, if you take that picture and apply it to what's happening in the US, if I had to say they were at stage 3, the US is just at stage 1 of this sort of dictatorship or totalitarianism power. So I think that,
period.
yeah, that's right. And I think that what will happen is when the people decide that they do need to stand up for something, the boots will come down hard. And so if there is not a preparation in place to just send masses of people into the streets, then it will be squashed quickly. If you look at South Korea and the president who was recently arrested for corruption, they don't have that sort of militarization against the people. The people of that country were allowed to flood the streets in the millions and say this is wrong, and not a single shot was fired. Very little social unrest because the people were allowed to peacefully get into the streets and say this corrupt president must go. We won't be able to have that happen here in the US. So we as a people, we as a society must prepare for the eventuality of social unrest, the eventuality of misjustice and abuse by the government, and the final eventuality that this empire, at some point in time, likely sooner than later, will fall.
I hate to say this, but I'm going to, and I wish it would fall immediately. I mean, I've heard Chris Dwayne say, for years, what's worth saving? Do you want to save the school system? Really? You want to save that? Do you want to save the political system? Seriously? What about the banking system? You want to keep that? What about the mass communications? You want to keep that what we have in place? Seriously? Think about it. You want what part of this nonsense do you want to keep? What is worth saving? Nothing. Not one piece.
And it's no doubt, we have talked about this before on your program. I know you've talked about it with other guests. We are in a stage of the collapse right now. It is a very controlled, still very corruptly controlled stage of the collapse, where the greedy little money hungry people are just vying to get more money as it falls.
Yep.
And they're just, it's like the movies where money's falling out of an armored truck through the sky and people are going crazy trying to grab it. That's how I envision the policymakers of this slow degradation of the US empire. and they're just greedily trying to grab every last dollar that they can. And that's what we see happening. Look at, we are still in a form of the stimulus fake bubble that has kept the cogs of this country and the cogs of the entire global economy moving. It's just that now every major company, major government is saying this is going to end, and they're putting military preparations in order, and they're going to vie for power instead of economically, kinetically. And that's what we see happening in the South China Sea, vying for kinetic power. That's what we see happening in Yemen and Syria, with the U.S. and NATO moving NATO troops right to Russia's borders. That's what we see happening. The UK secretary, this is just today, the UK secretary, the British Defense Secretary Michael Fallon, has called on all NATO members to increase their military spending this year. And they're doing that for a reason. They're doing that because Russia and China are rising to power so proficiently that without a great opposition, the U.S. will be the next Iraq.
Well,
and it will be squandered.
I want to address that because just within the past couple of days, and we reported it on Shadow of Truth yesterday, Russia and China now have completed step one of creating a gold-backed currency that would go between those two countries along with all of the BRICS nations.
That's right. And Iran and everybody else will jump on board too.
That's correct. All of the members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, all the members of the Eurasian Economic Union would jump on board. All of the countries along the Silk Road would jump on board. And that would represent roughly 60% of the global population and roughly 70% of the global resources, natural resources, 70%, including oil, including gold, including everything that makes our world what it is.
That's right.
Exactly.
And what we're going to see, what my trending algorithm says is a high likelihood is that we will see a new proxy war, unlike anything that we have seen before, fought between the U.S. and China over North Korea. And we're seeing an increase in this each and every day. And now we've got U.S. defense chief saying just today that North Korea must be stopped in its path toward being able to threaten, this is their quote, not mine, threaten the United States with a nuclear attack. So we have got an increase in rhetoric. And history tells us that when government-controlled mainstream media outlets increase their rhetoric against a quoted threat, what they are really doing is psychologically manipulating the readers and the listeners to stand behind whatever government action is taken.
Correct.
And so it's likely that we will see this happen. And China, on the other side, has been very sure in their stance on their sovereignty and has said that they will stand for no intervention in North Korea, and they will stand for no Western intervention in the South China Sea. They have went as far as to threaten Japan to remember the disaster that it struck with the World War and to not let that happen again by stirring this hornet's nest in the South China Sea.
Well, listen to those words, South China Sea.
That's right. It's not
called which part of China is misunderstood in there?
That's right. It's not the East Asian Sea. It's the South China Sea.
I don't know how to make it any clearer. It's the South China Sea. And anyway, well, Brad, I think we've given them quite a bit to chew on there. What do you think?
I think so. Well, there's so much more to talk about. We've got a global food crisis that's ongoing right now. We have a true disaster at Fukushima that is just getting worse with literally each and every day. We've got societal unrest, social unrest, and rising malcontent around the world. So I'd love to be back on in a couple of weeks or whenever you'd have me and kind of hit on some of those other topics with, I'm sure, the events that will take place between now and then.
Well, we'll get you back on. Maybe not within the next couple of weeks, but it'll be pretty quick. And Fukushima is at the top of my list for you and I to discuss next, because there's almost zero reporting. There is so little, it's not even funny. But
And just to leave everybody with the reason that is because they have done case studies and seen that when a people are given information that is construed as world ending. This was a recent university study. They took 80,000 people who played an online video game, and it was a game that people had devoted hundreds of thousands of hours to in their lives. And they shut the game down, shut the servers down, and let them know that within a couple of weeks, the game would be over. Their virtual world would be ending. And this university studied the people's reactions, studied their emotional states in real life, and then also studied how they acted their avatars in the virtual life. And they found that there was an increase in murder, a sharp increase in social unrest, and a general malaise throughout the society. So when you apply that university study to a real case event like Fukushima, we know exactly why the governments of the world will not let everybody know what is really happening. 60 sieverts per hour. That's over 6 times the lethal amount to a human. A human will die within 3 weeks after taking just 10 sieverts in an hour.
So the Fukushima 50 were the ones that was really the first major flag to the world that was squashed.
That's
Okay,
right.
the Fukushima 50, they died within days of going in, and now they can't even send robots in because
That's right.
the radiation is so high that it, quote, kills, end quote, robots. That
That's right.
is an
And
unbelievable amount of radiation.
just remember that 10 sieverts will kill a human in 3 weeks. And there are 600 sieverts pumping out every hour. 10 sieverts will kill a human, and 600 sieverts are pumping into the ocean every hour of every day. And because of the nuclear mix, the mix of materials that they used, including plutonium,
yes,
they will not be able to touch it for 40,000 years. That's generations upon generations upon generations.
and
That's its half-life.
in the meantime, it's melting into the core of the planet.
That's right.
So not only is it spewing into the ocean, and I did a back of the napkin calculation 2 years ago and came up with 75 million gallons of radioactive wastewater had been pumped into the Pacific at that time.
Yeah.
And that was a conservative number. So
That's
you've
right.
got that going on. You've got the melting of the fuel rods into the planet. You have a bunch of people that are covering it up and not talking about it, so that the technologies can't even be developed in order to attempt to deal with this thing. An ice wall, seriously? Ice wall. It's it's melting the planet, and you want to build an ice wall? Really?
Yeah, they're just at a point of controlled devastation. And you look at the $6 million robots that TEPCO sends in, it survives less than 2 hours. Shielded in the best technology that humankind has to offer, and it can't survive 2 hours to get to the core, because the nearer that it gets to the sludge that is melting into the earth, the nearer that it gets, the more radiation it takes and the quicker it malfunctions. And so they are literally at a guessing game. And
Yes.
there's a lot to be said here that this, without a doubt, is a world changer, and it's something that we all should prepare. And the way you prepare, and we'll talk more about this the next time we talk, but start preparing by researching what they did for the kids of Chernobyl. And they gave them pectin, same pectin you can buy in the canning section of Walmart or your local grocery store, 100% fruit pectin. They gave them that, in a measurable dose with apple juice each and every day. And the pectin pulled in the radiation and allowed them to pass it through their urine. So that's a proactive thing that you can start doing now, should you find the need and concern for it.
Well, that's a great piece of advice right there. Well, Brad, we could obviously go on for hours and hours, but I know you've got things to do. I've got things to do, and I will get you back on in fairly short order, and we'll pick it up right there. And
Great.
we've been speaking with Brad from Full Spectrum Survival. Brad, thank you very much for all your time today.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for listening. If you want to come over and check out the daily news updates that we put out, just search Full Spectrum Survival on YouTube. We'd be glad to see you.
We'll talk with you soon.
Thank you.